It's Today in EVE Online, April 25th, 2020. We're going to be talking about Forsaken Fortress, maybe some of the downsides of it. Hanging out with Caleb Roliat and new friend Chubby Man.
Hey guys.
Right.
Hello.
All right. Forsaken Fortress just came out. Sorry, it's just been announced. It will come out on the 26th. As a reminder of what that is a new state for structures that is called abandoned. That comes after low-powered state of 7 days. So if you run out of fuel from your fully operational citadel, it will fall into a low-power mode for 7 days, and then it will slip into this new state called the abandoned state. And at that point, it is destructible
Loot
without
pinata.
cycles. Yeah, it's a loot pinata. It can be destroyed right away. It drops the loot that's inside, yours and everybody else's who has stuff in there. And you can't tether on it, which is not really the big problem. I think that's a pretty smart problem because the tether is used strategically for these dead and floating structures now. So it's kind of unfair. So it's good they take that away. In any case.
Well, it's being used as a hunter's perch, right? So they already have complained a bit that now they can't do this living out of these small unfueled astrohooses.
Let's start there because that was one of the things I found interesting. There's a whole, Araya brought this to my attention that he's from the south, right? And when he travels north in Tribute in those areas, he can still perch on a lot of structures. And that gives him a lot of safety to kind of monitor a system and to hang out in it, to refuel his capacitor. And nobody's lived in these structures for a long time. Maybe there's a for sale sign. It's somebody who didn't want to take it down, but wanted to sell it to somebody who was moving in. There's a lot of those. And
ironically, that's one of the features I begged CCP to implement long ago. A type of contract where you can actually put structures for sale and people can ad hoc buy them as they see them, right?
Without having to contact you?
Basically, if I put it up for sale, I put it in a contract that's then visible on the structure browser, and then I can pretty much just click it and say bought, right? It's mine.
Yeah, I like that idea. That way, it's a 24-hour market. You don't have to wait till you get into communication. People don't check their email. It takes
it's like putting the
weeks.
sign up in real life, right? You're pretty much putting it in the lawn, right? For sale. There you go. Right. They have it in Black Desert Online with housing, as far as I remember. You actually sell your stuff like that. So you then pay some of these tokens that you need to buy from the shop. That's pretty much real money items. But again, that's also might be a good idea for CCP. Let us use the new node thing, the Hypernet thing, to actually put up real estate markets. That would actually be extremely fun.
Yeah. So that would be an interesting thing. But what I did like about that, the fact that he was going around in the north where there was, nobody that he could find or attack, and he could perch on these citadels, is it reminded me of ghost towns. And that was a little bit interesting.
Yeah, or cabins in the woods, right?
Yeah.
But again, you have to bring your own logs. And I think this brings the whole problem with this. I think there is a problem still with the fact that when it comes to fueling, you need all these ACL rights and you need to be accepted. I think it should be easier for people to get rights to fuel without necessarily having a downside. And I think even a fairly simple solution would be to allow the delivery from deliveries directly into the structure's fuel bay, regardless of whether or not you have ACL access, but of course only restricted to fuel-based items.
Yeah.
Basically, so you can neutral fuel in case of an emergency. If hit by bus and the structure owner is out and can't give you rights and blah, 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 it would be really nice if there was a way to fuel a structure that you're living in in those situations. And it would also, again, bring in the feature of bring your own logs to the hunting purge cabins and stuff like that.
Yeah, if they could exist that way. But instead, what's going to happen is these hunting perches won't be able to tether you, so you won't be able to hang out on them. They won't do you any good. They'll essentially go into a state of just waiting to be destroyed. So they actually probably won't exist for very long. I think once you stumble upon an abandoned, forsaken citadel, your inclination will be to destroy it because there might be something inside that you want or that drops. Even if you're a small gang of a few people, you still have to get through the damage cap. That hasn't changed, but once you get through it one time, that thing explodes. There's no coming back to it. There's no cycle that you have to wait for. It just explodes.
And that's going to be rebalanced. I would bet money on that. You're going to see a rebalancing of the whole way that structures work when it comes to what can easily aggress it and the whole damage cap. All those things, I believe, is going to get some sort of new pass. And I think this ties into what they're doing with Supers and Titans. You're basically going to see a situation where if you bring a wrecking ball, so if you bring anything of large scale, so Supers and Titans, then taking down structures, especially low-powered ones, is pretty much a 15-minute job and it's gone.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a little convoluted, but there's three components to this. One is that you come across your structure. Let's say it belongs to somebody else. If you find a structure and it's in abandoned mode, you can destroy it and get the loot out of it. That's high incentive to just clean off all the structures that have not been tended to, have run out of fuel in the last 7 days. So that's the scenario that we're looking at after the 26th. So essentially that's 7 days after the 26th because it needs to run out of fuel. It needs to go through the low power mode before it goes to abandoned. So you will see the first abandoned structures on June 2nd. So June 2nd is going to be the beginning of this minor gold rush.
The demolition derby.
The demolition derby, yeah. Well, demolition derby, you're smashing into each other. This is going to be like smashing into inanimate objects. That said, there is no asset safety for the people who have stuff in there. So if you have things in other people's structures, you have till June 2nd to make sure they're secure. Either withdraw them using asset safety that you can trigger manually, or you need to have assurances from the owners of those structures that they will keep fuel in them. That's a tall order. Especially,
and it brings on the whole thing that we can't see how much fuel is in a structure, right? We can't see any like ticking down of, and I think they take fuel for. They don't take it daily; they take it weekly, doesn't it?
No, I think it's every hour, doesn't it? This is every hour. Yeah, I think you.
No.
What do you mean take fuel? Load fuel or consume fuel?
When it actually consumes fuel on what the ticks are. Anyways, the point is that you should really be able to see how much has actually been put into the structure fuel-wise. So how long till it actually depletes. And if you have ACL access, and then on the structure browser, you should be able to see instantly when it goes into low-powered, so unfueled mode.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a while since I've owned a structure, but I think it was ticking away every hour. At least the fuel is consumed not by the structure itself; it's consumed by the modules that you turn on. So you can put a module in there, but you don't have to turn it on. And I think the cheapest one is like a clone bay. So I think, see, what they're trying to do is say you can't just deposit these and set it and forget it and walk away and always have that strategic perch. But I think what people will do is go that extra mile and they'll put in, a bunch of fuel and they'll put in the least consuming module, or they're called service modules. Thanks, Nick. Like the clone bay, I think, is the least consuming. And then you walk away, and but you use it for the next month or two as you need it. and then eventually the fuel will run out. Even the low consuming modules will run out of fuel, and then it can be destroyed. But by then you're not really using it. I guess that kind of works because it's not a permanent state. That thing isn't always there. But I still feel like hunters are going to do that. Like that's not going to stop that behavior. Especially if hunters are successful, they can buy many Astra houses, many small engineering platforms. So
and a secondary problem with this whole fueling shenanigans is that fundamentally we need a rebalancing on fuel consumption, because it should be a little bit more part of the whole ecosystem scarcity and rebalancing of all of that, right? So there should be a benefit from building larger stuff in a meaningful way, and then the whole diminishing returns thing. That I would really hope that CCP has a fuel and ammo balance pass on the horizon, because it's long overdue.
Yeah. Okay, so those are some of the stuff off the top of our heads. We're going to get into some of the other points here, which I think are critical. When structures had come out, one of the dreams of in EVE Online for a long time on the development side of things was to make everything creatable and destroyable. That's one of the key relationships in EVE Online. Players make things, players destroy things, and that's what keeps the cycle going. So for a long time, they wanted structures. People cried out they wanted structures to be destroyable, not just pauses or player-owned star bases, but actual stations and outposts. And so when they announced that the structures, these new structures that they were going to implement into the game would be destroyable by players, people went nuts with glee. But then they started complaining like, well, nobody's going to use these if they're destroyable. And on the right next to it, you have an NPC station, which is not destroyable. So as a player, I would live in an NPC station because all my stuff would be intact and guaranteed. It wouldn't be destroyed. So what they did is they said, so why would I be incentivized to move all my stuff and put it at risk inside a station that can be destroyed? So CCP said, well, because there's going to be incentives to work together and to live in these destroyable citadels. And that is, you'd get tax breaks, you'd get research advantages, you would do everything faster. It would be better for you to live there because you would just make more profit with your stuff. You would cut your costs at a higher degree. And that was the relationship. And
then they brought in infinite slots and it didn't matter.
Yeah, you're right. Right. We'll get to that. I mean, that's a different subject. So the point is...
It is the subject, because what you just explained, the incentive was nerfed by CCP themselves, because the incentive was there when slots were limited, because then this whole benefit would be massive, right? But when they then made NPC stations have infinite slots, then there is no longer that benefit from moving out, right? There is a bit of a benefit, but since you can just scale everything by just using more blueprints or more characters, then there's no slot limit. Theoretically, there's no slot limit for you, right?
Right. But there's a natural balance, right? If you just look at things both with, let's say, unlimited slots exist, which they do, which means you can run as many jobs of industry that you want. There's no limits like there was before. You still have incentives for profiteering as opposed to safety. And that's kind of been the trade-off. Now, if you say there's only 10 slots per station, the NPC stations are going to get filled up, which means you'll never be able to do any of the stuff unless you move out into a player-owned structure, which is more risky. So you're pushing people out. It's like, all right, you're grown up, kid, get out of the house, go. So that will help push people to destroyable structures, but that's what I mean. It's a different subject. It puts even more pressure on the situation of moving out of NPC states. The point is, CCP wanted us to move out of NPC structures. They incentivized us. And if they hadn't put in limited slots, they would have also given us a stick to get out. Either wait a month and a half to run a job or get out and get your own place.
Yeah, but those sticks never really materialized, right? We did the type of incentive they gave us is a soft incentive, right? And similar with taxes and markets and stuff like that. It takes a lot of time to actually get the effects of a soft incentive.
Hmm.
Especially, you pretty much only see this happening now when it comes to market stuff. It's only now that you're seeing raw materials being primarily sold and bought in player-owned structures. And even that, because people are still risk averse, they will still take the hit and trade
Yeah.
in GDA 4.4 primarily. And that's because CCP is not pushing hard enough. They're not using the stick, and they should have been using the stick since day one. Because
Okay, but
that is what creates content.
okay, but the point is, they wanted us to move out of NPC stations and move into player-owned stations. So that means
Yeah,
get your own station, which can be war decked. It now allows your corporation to be war decked. That is a disincentive, or you use somebody else's station.
yeah, and now we finally got the feature for that, because that was already one of the complaints about the POS system, that you couldn't rent out access and you couldn't easily manage access to do scales or
Yeah.
outsourcing and things like that. So the whole business thing of creating a dedicated POS for only research that you then rent out the slot, it incurred a lot of trust requirements, right?
Mhm.
And that's just difficult. Where when you can then just do it by renting the slots directly from a structure owner, this was like supposed to be a massive revolution. And this is another one of those examples of CCP bringing in something that is potentially amazing and unseen and unheard of in most of the gaming development business, and then not utilizing it, right? They're not using it optimally. Moon mining and structures should have been 10 times more cool than they are.
All right. Don't blast them too much, because there's people on both sides of this, right? And that's what I want to get to. So you have to
Well,
use.
I'm not blasting them. I'm telling them they have fucking gold and they are not utilizing it. It should be done the way it was planned, because then they would really have something completely unique that's never been seen before.
Well, you and I are in agreement on some of the stuff that we talk about, but they obviously also are looking for other characters' happiness as well. It's not just the make everything scarce for the people who know how to play this game, who have the built-in assets, who have been here a while, have the relationships already, have the momentum. That those people are the only ones with the advantage, because you're starting from scratch. It's hard to get up and running on a lot of the stuff that we tend to like, because it makes what we do. Because the kind of stuff that we like makes it harder for other people to do the same thing we're doing. And so they have to look out for those newer players that want to get involved, right? Especially in an old game where you hear people say, I don't want to play Eve. It's already sewn up. People already know how to win that game. And why would I join a game that's already won? So anyway, that's, again, off topic a little bit. I want to talk about using other people's structures and how that may be a bad thing in this Forsaken Fortress. And I want to see if I can drag in. I don't know if he'll agree to this, but Chubby, we were just talking, right? And I'm wondering if you would tell us your story on air. You don't have to.
Yeah, not a problem.
So first, tell us about yourself, and then your situation with your blueprints.
Right, I'm into the game 18 months.
Can you talk a little bit louder? I'll turn you up.
Yeah, sure. I got into the game about 18 months ago, and I started on the mining and industry side of things, which led me into a nullsec corp for about 6 months. Then they got war decked by PH, and I had to move everything out. So I started using NPC stations to store all my stuff. But I've been trying to use player-owned structures for all my industry and refining. Well, that was great until A, Wardex came out, and B, the fuel situation came out with this new fortress. So now I'm in a system where I need to move 8 billion worth of assets using a bestower or something smaller, which is around about 40,000 M3. I have over 200 blueprints, and most of my wealth is in my blueprints. I can easily move them, but it's going to be a real, loot pinata for anybody that actually catches me. So I'm going to have to break this down into a lot of trips. Last time I did this, when going from null sec to high sec, which was only 3 jumps. It took me 3 weeks because I've been building all these holes for the corporation, and now the corporation was moving 50 odd jumps. So I left, but it still took me 3 weeks. Now that this fortress thing has happened, I need to do the same thing again. I was right in the middle of building a whole load of holes, and because of the mining changes to start with, but also the war decking, my refinery went down. They're decommissioning that. But more importantly, my factory has just gone down 20 minutes after my refinery. That's 800 million I've got in research and jobs, which is now off limits to me. Because the timer's gone, it can't be refueled. Because it can't be refueled, they're tearing it down. Because they're tearing it down, all my industry jobs are now on pause. I'm going to have to wait until Monday when they decommission it for everything to go into asset safety. And that's when I'm going to have to redo all those jobs, which is another 800 million. I can't do that. I've only got $1 billion left. So that's my kind of story.
Yeah. We were talking earlier about how we wanted to help other players pay them rent, pay their taxes, give them some gameplay, and how I had put up some jobs in my own experience. Instead of basing out of NPC, I wanted to help another player out, so I was doing my work there, but he ran out of fuel or something happened, and my jobs totally stopped without any alert to me. And at that point, I thought, well, if they want us to use each other's structures and build cities where we can go into other people's stores and everything else, they need to somehow cocoon our experience there so we don't get screwed when they get screwed, or when they decide to do something, or when they forget to do something like fueling something up. And this new fortress thing feels like it's going to be the death of any kind of cooperative structure usage. I think they went the wrong way with this, Caleb, maybe, and anybody else is in here can talk. I think what they were trying to do is they wanted to have a lot of, in high sec, to see a more populated area. But I've always thought that these structures, even the small one, the Astra House, the one that's pictured here blowing up, was too big. It was too big, and it had too many. It had too much power. Basically, you could do too much with it. So I honestly feel like it was more than any one person needed. So it wasn't an individual kind of structure. And I always, every time I docked in an Astra House or something, I always felt like this is too big for one person. This isn't a home. This is like, it's a giant space station. And at the same time, it was too unsteady to share it with other people, to say this is our corporate headquarters. And it feels big, so let's have multiple people living in here. Yet all the stuff that would make that possible was just so unfinished, it seems like. The fact that one person controlled everybody else's experience in it. And that's fine if you're a corporation and your guys and you're depending on your CEO and he's dependable and he's not inactive. That's fine in an alliance. But if you want us to play with strangers, it seems like those kinds of aspects of using other people's structures were not complete. There's no safety in it. And again, I know Hilmar says that trust is a very, very important commodity, and the risk makes that trust even more valuable. But at a certain point, I got to play with people with different time zones that I don't know very well, and I don't want to get set back. I mean, Chubby was just saying he was set back 80% of his total money. That's a huge setback. That's pretty disagreeable. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I do feel that there's a little bit of a conflict in the way that CCP has designed and then changed it. I think that with this Forsaken Fortress, they're attempting to address proliferation of the structures, and to encourage people to shoot them, they have been made so that they drop something. However, the very stated reason that asset safety existed in the first place was that they didn't want people to be able to just simply lose everything in one go. So it's a little bit of a conflicting message. Asset safety exists so you don't lose everything, but we're going to make it so that you can lose everything.
Well, I
There's
think
plenty of things to change, but it's difficult. It's impossible for CCP to address it all in one go. But it's a bit confused at the moment, is what I think.
there was a lack of safety in wormholes, and they're now starting to extend that into known space. Go ahead, Caleb.
Oh, it's just when it comes to the safety thing, I think it's an important feature to have in there. I just think that they didn't really create it in a way that balances out the hybrid that structures were supposed to be, right? Because you have pauses and you have conquerable stations. What would be a hybrid between those two, right? And they landed it pretty well, but when it comes to asset safety, I don't think they really did. I don't think they thought it through. I think one of the major missteps is to allow asset safety to go into NPC stations. That might sound a little bit weird because that's kind of the purpose. But if you consider that you could only evacuate your stuff to another player structure, you don't have this option to put it in unassailable locations. You only have the option to put it into another assailable location. I think that would have been a much better solution. And it would also mean that you could do the thing of keeping the wealth in the game by saying, okay, the fee that you pay is actually paid to the receiving structure owner. Things like this would be a much better ecosystem based design. But I do think that we need asset safety, and asset safety is not going away only if it's untended, only if it's unfueled. And that's why we talked about earlier before you joined, Phantomite, that we need an option to make it easier for more people to have fueling access without it being a risk to the structure owner.
Or you mean, like, for instance, anybody can add fuel to
Pretty
it?
much,
Because
yeah.
really,
Ideally.
what offensive way is there to fuel a structure?
Yeah, my suggestion would be that they use the contract system, so you can put up a contract, and when anyone delivers fuel, then the contract just puts that fuel directly into the fuel bay of the structure owner. So then you can see that he's created this whole range of contracts, maybe with a rising price. So there's going to be enough for that structure regardless. Someone can always neutrally add logs to the cabin, basically.
Would it not be easier just so that everybody has put access to the fuel tank?
Yeah, but I think coding wise, I think that would be difficult because you would have to create some sort of way for anyone to view that bay, right, regardless of setting. I think it's tricky. If it could be done, that's of course preferable. But I was just saying that a workaround would be something like allowing delivery to go directly into a fuel bay by just adding it to the options in deliver to, or doing it as an actual contract thing. I think that's a nice workaround. And usually I hate Band-Aid solutions, but in this case, I think we desperately need it. And it's been mentioned many, many times before by structure owners, also by nullsec.
All right.
I like it.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Fonswig. Morning, Spot. How are you guys? Rolliat.
I'd like to add something if possible.
Please, Jurgen, go ahead.
Well, I'm a total Care Bear, but and I have no problem with this. I agree with Caleb almost exactly, except the biggest problem I think is that the scale. So when you're in a high sec corp, you simply don't have the numbers, and when you have an organization like Pirate that can field 100 people, you just can't face them down. And I think they ought to make it to where your corporation headquarters dictates whether you are a high sec, a low sec, or a null sec entity. And then if you are in that section, your headquarters is in that section, limit the numbers in the alliance. That way it would balance people out. And then also so you can defend as well as attack, and it fares up the fight. And then also that allows, and then don't allow organizations that are larger to downgrade. So it's real frustrating to have somebody like Pirate, who should be probably a low sec entity, run around in high sec just bullying everybody because they can. And that prevents anybody from growing from, say, a small corporation of 10 guys into a, say, medium corporation of like 50 who don't all play all the time. So you can only field like 20 guys in a fleet or whatever. And then you can't really step up to that middle portion to then move on. And so I think they could tie the headquarters base to a section of space, and that would allow a stepping pattern.
I
And
don't
then-
So
think you can.
I would
don't
like
think
to
you-
I
don't
would
think
like
you
to
can
address
hard limit
that.
like that. Hard limiting like that is
Okay,
very
Francois, you
counter
go.
to the game. I think what is necessary is that the structure that allows them to aggress should be in the region that they are aggressing. I think this is the type of direction they need to think, right? Because you need to have something that you can counter. So if Pirate is basically war decking left, right, and center, there should be an option to then return fire and aggress against their structures and basically take out their ability to war deck.
Okay, Fonsway.
So two things. Firstly, with regard to the current structure change that we saw in the dev blog, there's a lot of language used in this conversation that's all very past tense, like was good, was bad, would have been better, this would have been worse. But a key term, a key word that has been used by the developers with regard to structure changes, specifically Rise, is iterative. So we need to recognize that they are amidst the changes, and they may already be thinking of the one that's in your head, or we should share it on the forum or on Reddit or in this context as well. But I would refrain from speaking of the changes as such in past tense. I would always try to contribute to the next decision that needs to be made.
Before you
So
go on,
yeah,
that's one, and you'll have a second point. But I want to just add to that. The reason we're having this discussion today is there's a lot of I don't know if it's myopic thinking that this is a great change. It's of course this is the kind of change they needed over time, and I just think we need to have a good discussion on both sides of the issue to show there are other people who don't think this is necessarily the best change, or it's going to affect them in a certain way, or whatever. We want to look at the other side. When too many people agree that this is the way it should be, and CCP is only hearing from them, I think they make mistakes. So I'm happy to have this discussion on some of the drawbacks of this new patch. And I'm happy also to see that people in chat are very much for it and against this kind of stuff that we're talking about, but this creates a good discussion. So go ahead, Fonsway, your second point.
So the second point was regarding the high sec, the highly aggressive high sec groups like Pirate and Held On, etc. So these groups kind of engage in two activities. They have suicide ganking and they have war decking. They will camp the trade hubs, they will camp the routes, and they will suicide along those routes and at those hubs. They will declare war on whoever it appears to be profitable to declare war on, which allows them to fire on them in high sec without Concord interfering and punishing them, and allows them to attack structures. These mechanics are harsh. The players are unforgiving, but there is counterplay. And every time that I have lost to one of those mechanics, I have known why.
What's the counterplay? Fueling your station?
No, the counterplay. So I think that a Pirate was described as kind of choking out high sec and preventing corporations from progressing beyond a certain level of organization. So I'm just trying to address that directly, because I don't. And then that led into a discussion of like, well, let's change the game mechanics. And like, I'm not saying that the game mechanics don't need to change. I think that the high sec gameplay needs work. I think that wars and ganking have a lot. There's so much more potential in wars and in suicide ganking that could provide rewarding gameplay. But as it stands, it's still like I wouldn't call it fun, but it's workable. I feel like it's a really great filter. I myself have fallen prey to these people, to these players, and every single time I have A, known why, and B, figured out how to deal with it. I like to describe suicide ganking not as actual PvP combat. Suicide ganking is planning and preparation and lying in wait and knowledge and information. By the time you're getting locked and fired on, the round is already over, and you're just waiting for the fatality. Like, you've already lost. They know who you are, where you're coming. Either they know everything about you, or you just fit the criteria as you were passing by.
Yeah, they
This
have-
is all avoidable and can be dealt with. So it's harsh, yes, but it forces evolution, and it's a bit of a filter. And I know that's harsh to say, and I don't want to be like get good or whatever. But yeah, Matt, I'll go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I
It's
just
not
want
counterable.
to like.
There's no counter. It's an
I want to
assassin,
cut you
and
off.
You can't do
Not for
anything.
Caleb's sake, but for mine. I want to cut you off because I want to get back to. I think we're falling into that again. It's like, pirates bad guy. They're going to kill Care Bears and high sec, and that's not the counter that I'm talking about. I want to get to the real world experience of what it's like to try to use somebody else's structure. Like, if one of the goals is to populate the city and feel like you go to different places for different things, and that different people own different shops, and it is more of a world instead of your own private situation, then why not create a better situation for people not to lose all their stuff when they do trust somebody else that they don't know? I'm not talking about corporations, not talking about alliances. I'm talking about strangers who put up structures because they want to put up a marketplace. If you go and use that, or if you go and use their laboratory for turning on some blueprints and researching them, there are a lot of pitfalls to that. In fact, if you run into one pitfall, like I did, like Chubby did here, that's probably the last time you're going to do that. So here's the thing: when Citadels first came out, right? You had the Wrecking Machine video, and it starts out with like, here's all this beautiful promise, and look, we can build these magical cities in the clouds. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. I'm on board with that. That's very sci-fi, world building, technology, all this other stuff. It's got a lot of hope. And then comes the army that's coming to destroy it, right? And then there's this huge fight. And if you listen to the lyrics, it wasn't until the soft voice woman sang the song that you could hear the lyrics clearly, which were, go ahead and destroy this. I'm going to build another one higher, which means I'm coming back from this. You're destroying it, but I'm coming back from this. I didn't get that at the time. So when I saw that video and it was a rock band and I love that song, I really felt like, wow, this is depressing. Like, you were enticing me with this virtual world, and then you really just served me on a platter for these other guys' content. And that's one of the struggles I've had with EVE Online for a long time is anytime somebody says content, what are they talking about? I'll tell you, most of the time, the guys that live in this metasphere are talking about PvP content, ship-to-ship combat. Like that's the only thing that EVE has to offer.
And there's a very strong, almost protection-like thing going on for CCP when it comes to the aggressor. I'm not against PvP in any way. I'm just against the fact that we have never really had a decent discussion on what should be the options to counter this. And then we get these weird band-aid solutions to it, whether we're talking scamming or we're talking actual grief-like ganking or endless war decks. There's just so much of this is just not balanced right. I think CCP needs to sit down and think about this, because sure, we can keep this whole lambs to the slaughter thing going. It's fine. I don't mind it. I've been living in it since day one, right? Yeah. So it's okay. Right. I'm just saying, for the sake of the game and for the sake of the wallet of CCP, please come and fix this, because you will get twice, maybe triple the amount of paying customers if you fix this.
I think, look, it's not just about players fighting players, competing with players. There needs to be a lot more players enduring the world. The environment needs to attack us. The environment needs to be, just like in the world, a natural disaster. You need plagues like we're suffering now. Like, you need to have a world that's dangerous too. That heightens some of the excitement of surviving it as well. But players don't seem to see that. They seem to think that PvP is the only, player-to-player combat and dominance is the only game in town. But I don't even think that's a real thing. If you look at it, it's not players versus player. The real gameplay, for those that don't know, I'll tell you what it is. And it's protected gameplay, by the way. It is being king. That is the actual height of gameplay in EVE Online. It's not just PvPing, because you're just doing some stuff as part of a little bit of a gang. The real gameplay is being king. And there's a few kings that are pretty much happy with anything that plays into that. Let me keep my boys happy. Let me keep them stirring around. Let me keep them entertained, because it's good to sit on this throne.
It's ironic, because one of the things that people had issues with before Blackout is the whole umbrella stuff, and the fact that you are almost potentially perfectly protected in nullsec. When you are operating according to the rules, you are really, really safe. 10 times as safe as you are in high sec, right? Because there's no one that doesn't belong that can come into the space. And if you start aggressing against the people working there, there's going to be a police force in the form of the umbrella pretty much blobbing you and killing you instantly, right? So you had really good protection in nullsec, which is actually a situation you should have had in high sec, because that's where new players come in, right? So then we nerfed that with Blackout, and everyone lost their shit. And I'm not a fan of Blackout. I would like something like Rolling Blackout. But the fact that you add risk to an almost perfectly policed area is exactly what we needed. But we need the opposite in high sec. We need to have a safe, not a safe space, but a better balanced space where you can actually do something. This whole thing, it's like when you play Dungeons and Dragons. If you never get an initiative roll, but you're always just surprised and just get ganked, that's not a game you would keep playing. It's just dumb. It's like, okay, so you just killed me instantly. Fine. How did I die? You don't know, because you're dead.
I don't want to get into the weeds too much on this one, but we have had this particular discussion before. The suicide gank is the finishing move. It is the fatality, and that is what makes it avoidable. Like, by the time they're locking and firing, it's already over. But I can tell you, every single time I've died, I can point at why and what I could have done differently, and how that information was actually practical.
Caleb, can I just have a very brief back and forth with you? What attracted you to EVE Online in the first place? What about this game over any single player or other multiplayer?
Circle of Life and full free sandbox.
So, I think that you probably joined for the same reasons I did, which would be, quickly distilled down to, I like it because I'm living in a world that is alive, that is functional. Everything I do, affects somebody, even if it's just producing a piece of ammo. It's a piece of ammo that somebody will use. Would you say that that's a reasonable way to look at
Completely.
why the game's cool? So
Completely.
why should when tools are available to keep yourself safe and to go on the offensive against your aggressors, why should high sec get any kind of free pass?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that you should have an initiative. You should have an ability to defend yourself. You should have an actual and real ability to say, pay, even if it's some sort of racketeering. I should be able to just pay TTT to make sure that the forge is endlessly clear of pirate and war deckers.
It's called war decker. It's called forming a force or joining forces with other people who can form a force and fighting back.
If you can bribe authorities to look the other way while you destroy people, you should be able to bribe them not to. Just make it a bidding process.
And that's what I'm saying. I should be able to pay someone that is actually better at this than pirate to actually endlessly keep them away from my lawn. This is private security, right. And you can't effectively do this in EVE Online as the game is balanced now.
No,
I'm not against pirate. I'm just against the fact that
other players are the private security that you hire.
But it doesn't work because the game is not balanced, so it is not functional. It doesn't make the ship lane safe. It doesn't make my community safe. I will still get ganked and I will still get killed if I walk outside of my house and undock. That's just not realistic. It shouldn't be realistic because it's not realistic in null. You can't undock if you're not allowed. You're going to be insta fucking blabbed. If you come into the space, you're going to be visible, and people will be able to notify everyone around them. Be careful, there's burglars in the community, right? So that's what I'm saying. We need to have a similar balanced security in high sec, or at least the opportunity for it, but you can counter that with Vortex, because then you're putting skin in the game. I'm not against this whole blanket protection against what I would call griefing, because it destroys the sprouts. The people that are coming into the game, they will either they get the shakes and they say, "Oh my god, this is the coolest game ever," or they say, "This is shit, I'm gonna fucking leave."
All right, so
Well, I think
we
gained
fell
the
into.
correct
Hold on a
players
second,
to
Phantomite. We've
stay here
fallen.
then, haven't we?
Hold on a second. We've fallen into that same thing where we go back to the ganking thing, and it's a bigger topic. We'll come back to it, but I want to again refocus us, if we can, on this Forsaken Fortress. One of the things that we talked about that may be a downside is it's yet another reason not to trust somebody else's structure, because on the one hand, the CCP would want us to work together even if we don't know the other people or don't develop a relationship with them. So if we use their structure, they can actually run out of fuel and it can get destroyed, and we won't have any alert to it. I don't think there's no talk about alerting people who have things that are running in that station. We simply just discover that it's gone one day and our stuff is gone too. Seems not like a good idea, but maybe I'm not looking at it the right way. The other thing is one last thing, Spod, before you jump in. Somebody could do it purposely, right? Like if you open up a free port and you say, "Hey, I got a market in here. I've got a lab in here. Why don't you guys put all your stuff in here?" And some people do. Then they can say like, "Ha, you've fallen into my honeypot. Now I'm just going to take all the fuel out, and in 7 days I'm going to destroy it. Then I'm going to take all the loot that people put into this pinata, basically." Go ahead, Spot.
That's exactly what I was going to say, is that you can absolutely abuse it.
It doesn't even seem like a hard way to abuse it. It seems like a very easy way to do it. I'm not going to say it's just new players, but players who've been playing for 6 months and stuff. How would you see it abused?
Exactly as you said. So I could put up there is a defense against it, but I would put up a market hub, get it popular, however that may be, and then just leave it. Wait a couple of weeks and cash in. Of course, people can, in that meantime, where they've noticed it's got abandoned, if they've noticed it's gone abandoned, pull their stuff out, and using asset safety, they can remove their stuff. But that's still a cost to them. That's still a loss to them, and not through really any fault of their own.
I really got a little bit angry when I said that the TGT tower could actually abuse this and just lapse the fuel and then just war deck themselves with an umbrella corp and then just destroy it completely and then just get all the loot of all the users in there. But of course, he said that it's already been fueled for a year forward, so it's not really a risk. But the use is an option, and I also said that if Aerith really wants to cut the fat, he could do the same with the 1DQ tower.
It's an unrealistic abuse scenario, though, because even if you did it, say you did the Tranquility Trade Tower and Perimeter, everyone's going to figure out when that 7 weeks is up. They're going to know when it's going to pop, and there's just going to be a massive cloud of junk spewing across space.
Yeah, 7 days.
It's going to be just a free-for-all of people grabbing it.
Yeah, it would be like Burn Jita, but burn the tower.
Yeah. Thanks, 3P. He says, "I really like this TIS. Sometimes it pisses me off. Sometimes it's great fun. Thanks for the content." We're happy to do both for you. Make you feel alive. Yeah, okay, so that's something that could be abused by people. What about like the Freeport idea? Is that idea just dead? Like Freeport in Great Wildlands, somewhere that's a little more remote.
I think, to be brutally honest, it was never alive in the first place.
It had an infancy, and I thought that was really inventive, but I haven't seen it in a long time. There are Freeports out there, though. It's
not really a possibility. What you need to do is maybe allow more people to use a structure, but you can't just do a blanket neutral allowed. It's just dumb. It's completely impossible.
Like a request kind of thing. Yeah.
Referral. Stuff that, whitelisting and blacklisting. You need to control who's actually able to dock, because in this game, that's your downfall if you don't.
They there was a free port recently in Providence, actually. It was Alec and Noir that came through, and they put down a Fortizar, and they supplied it so that pirates could kind of resupply in the middle of Providence instead of having to ship their own stuff in. And
well,
that was
the dream has been alive since the very early days of Eve, and theoretically, it is possible to bring neutrality and free ports into an area, but it has to be done in a way where you do similar things to in the high-sec structure wars, right? You just keep being able to make sure that you have created enough profit to pay for rebuilding it. Then it's fine. Then you could have free ports as long as they've made enough money to be launched again as soon as someone potentially destroys them. There's not a problem. You can just keep spamming these things forever. As long as there's enough users generating enough wealth, it would be an endless loot pinata, but it's still possible.
Yeah. I just think, look, I mean, there's economic gameplay. I want to open up a place that people can come and buy stuff from me, and I'm going to create that stuff. Like, that is a viable part of this sandbox. And it seems like the rules are that there's no way that people would trust me to do that. I'm not talking about me specifically, but any person. There's no like built-in law that's going to say like, hey, bad business, if you are unfaithful to common practices, that you're going to pay a penalty. And somehow that's supposed to be celebrated. I get it. It's a, wolf eat wolf, except everybody wants to eat lamb.
But step one of this is exactly why I am trying to argue that we need more protection and more defense in high-sec that works and isn't this dumb Concord thing where there's just consequence. We don't need consequence. We need an ability to have a balanced gameplay where we are mostly catering towards the defender at all design when it comes to high-sec, because then the high-sec ecosystem, it will not be as profitable as low-sec, null-sec, and wormholes. And it shouldn't be at all, on the contrary. But there's going to be enough money flowing around between the players living in high-sec that you will then get the gradient to then get the gameplay that you're talking about, Matterall, where it becomes more complex, it becomes more political, and you will see these safety zones and potentially free ports and actual economic activity in empires that are being built. Right now, they're very communistic, centralized, and obfuscating. They're not interesting, right? To get the economic revolution that is needed in the game, they need to figure out how to balance aggression in high-sec.
Got it. All right.
Okay, narrow it down. Give us one particular thing that happens now that shouldn't be possible.
Shipping lanes. Shipping lanes is the most important. No, I'd like to answer this. If shipping lanes were made properly safe, you would get secondary and tertiary and quaternary trade hubs and spreading out markets and economic activity. It shouldn't be.
No. You're talking about the dangers of flying ships and things through high-sec and the way it chokes off your activity there because it's getting ganked and stuff like that without any warning. Give me something very specific.
All right, I'm gonna be the one asking the questions here for now. I'm gonna just actually interfere here and say, here's a quote from our chat. I want to get them involved because there's a lot of people out there who want to talk to. So Terrific Life says, Eve is in the same trap as so many MMOs. They are trying to make a game for everyone. You can't do it! ! They need to make the game PvP or PvE. You can't make a perfect mix. So many games end up in this trap.
That's a lie, because we've had that, not a perfect mix, but we've had a mix in EVE Online for almost 20 years. So
it's not a lie, but but you don't agree, okay?
Well, it's the closest thing you get to a perfect mix. There's still a few issues and things that should be ironed out, and this is why I was trying to answer Phantom Mike. Shipping lanes need to be more protected. They should not be able to gank this unless there is an active war deck. This is why I would tie aggression against freighter-sized ship and above to war decks. You can't actually aggress them unless you are in a war.
You're literally asking to get rid of suicide ganking on freighters there.
Yeah, but
you just said they have to be at war to be allowed to shoot.
Well, you could suicide gank off the trade lanes somewhere else.
Nobody's flying in the trade lanes with the valuable things worth ganking. That's why it's focused in the trade lanes.
Yeah, but the point is that if you can't even have the highways and the railroads of society against endless piracy and ganking, you can't have the
Why don't you
flow
take the
of
side
goods.
roads?
Because it's just not
They're
efficient, and
faster.
then you will not get arbitrage, you will not get secondary hub development, you will not
I
get
would
economic
ask
activity spread
if
out.
it's possible to achieve this level of safety that you require through player driven means rather than changing the programming of the game, as in bringing in other players to create this type of security that you want, as opposed to having Concord do it. Is that
Yeah, if you
something
could
that you think is achievable?
effectively defend the shipping lanes without the ship being destroyed instantly, because ganking is instantly.
No. The ship will still be destroyed instantly, but because we can't change the game mechanics. But additional players, acting as police or military, however you want, or whatever meta shift that the players decide on that is not programmed into the game, that creates an unfavorable situation for the gankers, is, I think, an answer to the world that you want. If you want it to be that safe, then we're going to have to get together a whole bunch of players who are going to make it that safe.
Don't you think it would have
Concord
happened?
isn't doing it.
Wouldn't it have happened by now if it was possible?
I think no. It's just a matter of if it's.
You don't think the will's
okay, so
there?
this is the question. This is the question that I'm asking Caleb. Like, do you think that this is something that players can do? Can we, as players, get together enough people to change the game in such a way that it is safe, that the pirates are not able to operate the way that they want to operate? If they still manage to go, maybe it's not profitable. Maybe they can't do it.
No, not
You
without
don't
changes
think that's
from CCP.
possible?
No, not possible. It would have happened already if it was possible. It's been tried.
Well, that's a fallacy, but I'm willing to accept that it's not possible, but not simply because it hasn't already happened. So I would suggest that any changes made to the game should not just take away this or remove that. It should
I mean,
grant
what
the
do you think?
players
What
the
do you think it
tools
would
to create
take?
that world you want.
Sorry to interrupt you, but what do you think it would take to make that happen if it hasn't happened already?
Think more along the lines of giving other players the tools to change the scenario, as opposed to ships don't die when you shoot at them, because ships are going to die when you shoot at them.
My personal problem with that is if the empires aren't going to rule their territory, then why should they have it?
It's up to us.
But no, it's their facilities. We're living in their empires. When we talk about empire space, right? Why don't they rule it? Now I know the lore part of this, that they rule over the people, and we're not people. We're corporate capsuleers, which is totally different, and they don't interfere with us. They just know how to turn us off and destroy us when we get bad enough at each other or something like that. But it almost feels like the empires don't deserve the space that they actually control. Unless you're in faction war.
Because nullsecers are better at defending their space than highsec, which is in
they're much better.
Yeah, highsecers are soft.
They're much better. And does that make any sense that pirates would be better able to defend civilization than empires, than true empires? No, I don't think it's logical.
Is a player shooting another player anything to do with the empire? That's none of their business.
Well, lore-based, it's not, yeah. But I mean, if you're talking about this place as a landscape, right, and you have dangerous areas over there in the forest where there's lawlessness, and civilization here where there's not, you should have that geography. I think it would make the game more interesting than you're up for grabs wherever you are. In fact, you can't even fight back very well in this scenario because you're dead before you ever have a chance to take evasive action. There's no alerts. You can't hide your cargo. They can scan into it, but you can't block them from scanning into it. There's no counterplay, as was being said. Again, we're back on ganking, which is not really where I wanted to go.
You're describing the end game, where you've already lost. So at that point, there is no counterplay because your counterplay was minutes and hours and days and weeks ago.
Your counterplay was not to move your stuff at all.
No, there are ways to move it that avoid these particular risks. Either, so Olmeca in chat is saying, use scouts and Webbers and stuff,
Webbers, that makes sense that you would use.
Then I would like to ask Olmeca, can I have ansiplexes in highsec, and can I have jump freighters in highsec? Because then we can start talking.
No, there's a place for you if you want to build your own infrastructure. It's called nullsec. It's there, ready for you to build your infrastructure and make you rich.
But it should never have been safer in null than in high sec. It makes no sense.
Well, that's a balance problem with NISEC.
Yeah, look,
If you say so, I think it's both.
scouting works to a certain degree. It's not 100%. Okay.
Intel,
Webbing a
like,
ship.
timing your stuff.
Yeah. Webbing your ship is just completely ironic. I mean, it doesn't make any sense that you would have to slow down your ship to speed it up. That's something you have to know.
Works.
No, we don't all know. You and I know.
So
and
if something is that important, then you can also leave it to the professionals.
That I like.
Players who do this professionally.
That I like. I like the service opportunities that can give you a higher degree.
They're the ones that know how to deal with the ganking, either monetarily or through business deals or through game mechanics or whatever. They have worked it out. There are multiple organizations that have worked it out so that this math works for them. If this ganking was such a huge problem, if Wardex and ganking and all of this danger in HiSec was such a huge problem, then these professional organizations that exist in game, and there's more than one, would cease to function. So obviously they've figured out how to deal with it.
It's a little expensive. They don't take small packages. New guys that probably need the support more are least likely to say, I can take a 50% loss on this profit here. Hello, Mecca.
Hey guys.
You got tired of typing, decided to jump in?
Yeah, there's so much safety talk. I felt like interfering in.
Okay, I don't have to say anything anymore. Mecca's going to take care of it.
I was trying to keep up with chat. It's hard to read all the stuff. It's coming in pretty fast.
It just feels like I have to explain this in exactly the same way that I've been trying to explain why we needed scarcity back in the game for the past 5 years. And this is the same thing. If you want a healthy economy in HiSec, you have to fix these things, because this whole thing of just arguing from antiquity is just bullshit, because this is not about whether or not you can figure out how to move your stuff in 2 billion worth of packages at a time. This is much bigger, because if you want value to flow in a system, packaging for 2 or 1 billion and paying 1 to 2% in fees per jump in HiSec, it's just not viable. It doesn't create a dynamic economy that we want back, because we used to have something like that before we started getting all the dumb changes like raw calls, like scooping in space with freighters, and all of that shenanigan. The game used to be better when it comes to shipping. That was why we used to have actual secondary and tertiary hubs. Now we don't.
Why don't you copy the people who can do it? Who can do it professionally? Why don't you just copy
It's
their
not about
methods? Then
doing
you
it.
don't have to pay. You don't have
It's
to
still
pay their
not
1 to 2.
enough.
I don't see why it's not enough. They managed to do it completely. They managed to do it.
You're not. Your argument is not valid, because you're asking me to do something with my time that I consider opportunity cost and I would outsource, but the actual cost of it is too high, so there is no profit margin. This is about high macroeconomics that doesn't work anymore. It's just broken.
Okay, so here's another thing, though, and this is kind of more to the development part of this, is what kinds of players stick around EVE Online? What's the company's better investment as far as players? What kinds of players stick around for EVE Online long term and pay money to the company to keep this place funded? Is there a difference?
I think that's interesting. On the surface, some people might say the answer is, oh, it's the people who can take the punishment, but I don't think it's that. I think it's actually a little bit more nuanced than that. I think it's the players who enjoy engaging in the world that can be punishing if they're not.
I think it's more like EVE is a very unique game, and the ruthlessness makes it unique. But the early funnel, nobody cares about like the very unique parts of EVE that makes it very attractive, and so they wanna. So there's a very early funnel where a lot of people drop out without knowing what they don't know. But then once you get to know the opportunities out there, the things you can be, and that takes a year or so. So I agree that there is something pertaining to keeping HiSec as a place where players can keep playing until the point where they're aware of the opportunities that exist, right? So I agree that HiSec should be a place where it's catering not just a unique kind of like ruthless player where he doesn't care about losing his ship, and he so I think HiSec should cater everyone until that point where they're aware what kind of opportunities there are. But I also think like CCP has done some very strong improvements, like for wardic changes or the bumping changes and so on. So it's not like nothing. I think the game is better with that respect compared to the past. Yeah, there are still scams. Yeah, there are still freighter ganking, but I also agree with the message that like no space should be free from explosions. I think even high stake and some of the previous data that CCP has shown kind of you remember the data where if you get ganked and killed, you're likely to stay in the game, right? So
So,
there's that aspect as well.
a question for you all, Mecca. Would you say that the better the education and documentation are, and the better the systems are for getting new players into groups with other players, in other words, getting these players up to speed, the better this entire holistic system is, the less of HiSec needs to be, as you described, safer? Like you said, you want them to understand the opportunities and the dangers before they're shoved out into the world. So the better we are at making them aware of that, the sooner we can shove them out. Would you agree with
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. And we did our best as CSM, and I think CCP does. Like, of course, they have limited resources, so they cannot fix everything at the same time. But they're aware that the MP and like the funnel that puts players through the very early game until they meet some other players and they organize and they choose where they want to go next. That
Well,
funnel is very broken, and there is like very stupid places where people just leave the game because, and then some of those stupid places, CCP actually fixed it recently, and then
you mean like where the game asks you, are you sure you want this to be your character? And everyone.
yeah, like that, yeah. So and then, but that exists. Those points exist not only in the first hour, not only in the first day, but until maybe your 6th month. There are such points where players just trickle out the game. And
They've shown a concerted effort. They've shown a huge amount of resources thrown at that that early stage, and the progress is slow but notable. I think that
very notable.
made
I mean,
very significant.
you guys noticed we surpassed 40K. Yeah, it's a bit COVID effect, but also the increase began before that. And in the CSM summit, we have been shown data about this. So I think it's not the veteran gameplay improvements that caused this. I think it's most of it comes from more new players sticking with the game. So it's very noticeable. It's going to be like small point after small point, and it was like that small issue after small issue they fixed for a year, and eventually we get to a point where more players
Iterative change.
Yeah.
And so there are actually two specific changes that I want to highlight that really, I think, made a huge difference in new players feeling comfortable. One was I think they did them in reverse order. They should have done them backwards, but the one that went in a while ago was the pointer that allows other players who know where things are to point at things for players who don't know where things are. For anyone who's unaware, there is a window that you can open up where it allows you to drag links to chat and link them to people. And it's a blue link, it's a unique color. And if the player clicks that link, then a blue arrow appears on their user interface pointing at the thing that you linked them. So never again does someone have to say, what the hell is an overview? Which was a huge problem. But an even bigger step was limiting the need for this tool to begin with the new tutorial that they are A/B testing right now, which is Halo Combat Evolved style. For anyone who remembers the original Halo game, when you first loaded in with a new character, a new game, you had no HUD, no UI whatsoever. You could move the mouse and that just move your camera, and that was it. And even that was kind of locked down to begin with. They even told you how to do that, or the gamepad. And they introduced the UI element by element in universe. And the tutorial that is currently being tested does this, and it shows you this is this piece, this is that piece, this is the other piece. So much fewer people even need the pointer tool, but it's still there. And these two changes have made the game much more understandable and playable for a large number of players.
All right, so I'm going to refresh this discussion by letting you know that we're talking about Forsaken Fortress, which is a new patch that will come out on the 26th. It introduces all structures will go into a certain, once they run out of fuel, will go from fully operational to low power mode for 7 days. After that 7 days, you'll run into what's a new state here called abandonment state. And at that point, it can be destroyed and all the loot drops. So whatever's in there drops. And you can't tether on it once it's in abandoned state. So basically, this is supposed to be for citadels that just for people who left the game and left their citadel there. Right now, they're permanent fixtures that people can use. They can even tether on them if they're allowed to, if they're free-ported. And that's not necessarily good for the overall balance of the game. So now they're going to make all those structures that are abandoned destroyable, and you get to keep what's inside if you destroy it. That's going to happen.
Service modules, 7 days. If your service modules don't draw fuel for 7 days, then there's no timers, no tether, and everything drops, no safety.
Right. So that actually comes in this month on the 26th, which means the earliest you will see abandoned structures will be on June 2nd. And that's what we're talking about.
Get your war decks ready.
And what we're talking about, go ahead.
I wouldn't give up on the notification. I think that's something CCP can still consider, and I'm pushing for it. And I think that's something that can happen. If that happens, I think that solves a lot of the problems with
but what would you do? Send them an email? How about people who are away from the game? Like send them an email to their account?
Well, I will say in-game notification, but if you're away from the game, I agree with the line of argument that maybe you should stash your stuff in a safer position, which exists in the game.
Yeah, but
if you really had to go without any opportunity, even then you can get everything into asset safety, pay 15% later, and that takes 1 minute.
Well, here's the thing.
Anytime a major shift happens like this, there's two groups of players. There's the players who are affected because they're used to having it the other way, and then there's the players who start playing on that day. And from that time forward, they have no expectation of this. So yes, there are players whose gameplay will be changed. It will be more difficult. They no longer have access to the kind of gameplay that they had before. They used structures before. Now, if they want their stuff to be safe, they cannot use structures. And that's it. And if you use structures, there's a risk. New players coming in will not have this expectation, and they will mold their gameplay accordingly. So if new players can handle it, then the rest of us can handle it. And fair, not fair, or otherwise, we all wake up to the same EVE Online client, which is kind of like a line I've been using a lot. We all have the same opportunities. We all have the same abilities. We can figure it out. We can do this because we're smart and we're EVE players.
All right. Thanks for the pep talk, Fonsway. I do want to go back to people who don't play the same way that you play, don't have the same amount of time, don't have the same situation. There are people who are in the military who go on deployment. They may leave. If you're asking them to get all their stuff and move it or asset safety at some place, that's going to cost them 15% of what their actual assets are. Or they have to join a group that is living and can hold the structure up.
Again, that's only for players that already have the situation. They now have to decide. But new players coming in will be like, okay, I can choose this riskier gameplay, or I can choose the less risky gameplay and use NPC stations.
It's like we keep focusing on the negatives, but every patch is a weighing. Every patch is a trade-off between the positives and negatives. So.
Mecca, we're not focused on the negatives all the time. In fact, this is one of the few times we're exploring the other side of it. Everybody had great praise for it. You can see in chat, you can see in yesterday, most of the consensus was this is good. It's going to clean the place up. We're just exploring the stuff that is
that
is not consensus.
That's fair enough, but it's important to remember. I think people celebrating, or at least I am. We're not we're not claiming that there are no downsides and nobody's getting hurt by this. It's just pure utilitarianism. So there is more good out coming out of this patch, I think, compared to the number of people and who was going to be harmed and the level of harm they're going to receive. So yeah, that's important to remember.
Well, you're part of CSM, and CSM, I imagine, they had a discussion about this. They talked about asset safety. Is that appropriate for people who were away and stuff? So I know you guys had a vigorous discussion about it. I don't know how many people agreed or disagreed. But I worry that that not all the considerations were really explored there. And again, I asked the question, what are the better players for EVE Online's longevity? I mean, the people who have built this game, are they the people that come and go in 2 or 3 years because they like the excitement of the fight? Or are they long-term players that like collecting things and min-maxing things over a long period of time? People who reinvent themselves over and over again to explore more and more of EVE Online. Like, the way I see it, and I have no statistics on this is pure intuition of playing this game for 12 years, 10, 12 years, is that there are people who like the excitement of the fight, and then they like the social aspect of it. And then there are people who play quietly by themselves, who slowly build and slowly grow. They're risk averse, but after a while, they start moving into a different part of the food chain. And they've been at it for many, many years because it takes a long time to explore every different type of gameplay and to get very good at it. So I worry that those people are the ones that are going to be affected by this, and they're kind of quiet. But that's just a worry.
I don't know. I mean, in many cases, well, I don't know if how helpful it is to split player, like categorize player base with different. My categorization is that there are builders in EVE and there are fighters in EVE. So some people like to build, and that's not necessarily building your growth and assets and accounts and solo or in an organization, but also it includes building your organization and social structure and that kind of thing. And some people are into the experience of EVE, where be it PvP, exploration, whatever you do in space actively, those chills. I think those are the two main reasons people play EVE. But I don't think necessarily whoever getting the most negative effects out of this patch, I don't think necessarily they would categorize into one category or other.
You don't think the builders are getting the shaft on this one?
Well, the builders, the silent builders in the high sec.
No, anywhere. Builders anywhere. They could be. Well, I guess if they're part of nullsec, this doesn't really apply.
Well, the builders are very capable of, I think, making informed choices about where to stash their stuff and holding their stuff when needed and so on and so forth. For example, a veteran normal player who has to leave tomorrow because they have to deploy, so they cannot even log in, and they're in normals. Maybe they're the ones already that were getting negatively affected by the lack of asset safety in normals. So those are the kind of people that already exist, and you cannot say it's builders or fighters. It's just some people will, yeah, like I would expect like maybe 50 or 25 people in a year having to go really fast without any opportunity to, and even then they can contract their stuff to a friend at least to move them. So I mean, there are so many options here. I think we discussed all this in CSM, but the main discussion is it pertains to asset safety in normal structures, not in abandoned structures. So because also there are a lot of arguments that should be um, that should be like changed to promote offense or to the structure. So the way I see it, at least, I don't know, I cannot speak about the other CSMs, but I think I'm not alone in this. The way I see it, this abandoned structures and change in as a safety in there, I see it as a very, very low hanging fruit that CCP could have done like a year ago, that to promote some more explosions, because that's, I mean, maybe you don't see it that way, but most, like a lot of people see explosions as what's lacking and needed in the game immediately.
Yeah, I don't see
More
it that
stuff
way.
getting destroyed.
I don't see it that way, but I mean, I see it as a problem for you guys that like being in fleets and doing stuff, but I don't see it. I see it as a, and I would disagree with Hilmar on this because I think he may ascribe, I'm ascribing things to him that may not be true, but I think he feels like ships blowing up is the lead engine of EVE Online. But I think because we focus so much on that, and the players who get the voices and talk to CCP focus so much on that, they leave a lot of people behind. A lot of quiet people who are basically like people who like models, who like model building. They're quiet. They work at home by themselves, and they're building things quietly and that sort of stuff. You know, people have like figurines that they paint. Really takes them a month to do it. I'm not that kind of person, but I can sympathize with that.
Yeah.
And I think you're serving them up. You're serving them up instead of fighting each other. If you guys like to fight each other. Why do you keep
But if you
pushing?
remember, because it's nothing is in isolation, right? I remember I ran my CSM campaign saying that we have builders and we have fighters, and then the game has shifted toward builders since the Rorqual, since the capital patches, since the Citadel expansion, which is like about 5 years ago, I think 5 or 6, and then that created a lot of out of balance issues. And then now the game should change toward the benefit of the fighters, because those categories are actually not mutually exclusive, right? You can choose
I think
to be both.
I think
And
the people that you hunt, like the builders in nullsec that you hunt, are the fighters, right?
Yes. So they both hunt and they fight. But for example, the reason why that kind of safe umbrella in nullsec gameplay became very pertinent and became very important and relevant, and all it has sent a lot of CSMs into this council, and all the relevant groups are in that model now. PanFam is using the same model. Test is using the same model. That the reason why it is because the building stuff was so much emphasized that they just chose to turtle up and build stuff up until a point where the stuff is too much and too, like, a lot of the stuff is blued up, so it's like too asymmetric.
It's too safe, right?
So yeah, and there are no fights. There's stagnation. So as you see,
that's a function of players, though. That is not a function of mechanics.
I disagree. That's a fun. I think
no,
that's
players have made these bonds, and they've said this is the best way to work, and this is what'll make us the most powerful, I guess.
Yeah, but like, imagine, for example, the ecosystem team is making the anomaly changes, right? So that's already decreasing the farm available per region.
All these changes kind of insulate the wealth that was already built. Like, the new wealth is going to be harder to generate. So the people who already had the old wealth are actually getting a bonus. They're shutting the door behind them.
I don't say that argument is not invalid, but if CCP has to care about like what people have built before nerfing the stuff, then they cannot just do any change. Like, it's very hard to balance stuff if they have to care about, if they have to care about what they have to care about is EVE 5 years from now, EVE 10 years from now, in which case those stashes won't mean as much and the game will be balanced. But what I was saying was,
go ahead.
If so much farm wasn't available in a single region, then you wouldn't be able to stack 35,000 players within a single region, right? And then those 35,000 players create bonds in between, and they play together and they have fun because mechanics allow them, and then they become an entity it's very hard to break apart, right? So if they were different organizations, say they are still blue to each other, but they were different organizations in different regions, right? Like, say the old CFC had maybe 6, like before World War B, they were living in 6, 7, 8 region. Then those kind of relationships are easier to break, easier to, like, more fluid. But if if you insert so many people in a single region, that's not fluid relationship. That's like a very, very static relationship, and it's not gonna change very easily. So we've made it possible for those relationships to become very non-fluid, and then we are experiencing the stagnation after that non-fluidity. But those relationships didn't emerge because players have chosen. They emerged because so many mechanics fostered and enabled those relationships, beginning with rorquals, citadels, and infinite anomalies in a single region, and so on and so forth. Those are the mechanics I've always like pointed at as the culprits of stagnation.
All right.
So, in my opinion, mechanics enable stagnation, not people. So, and then mechanics should change.
I don't know,
to
like,
benefit.
I remember back when they said, "Oh, here's the null deal," right? And you had people like Vince and Matani agreeing, and many others from Triumvirate, from all these the big groups of the day, for the most part, right? Were saying, "Hey, if you give us occupancy solve, this will fix our problems. This will make us, this will give us what we need to fight each other." So there was 3 bullet points to it, and one of the major ones was give us occupancy solve, and CCP basically did that. So there was kind of a contract, right? Like, if we give you some of the stuff that you want, and you are the players, and you're going to fix the game, then do it. And players didn't hold up their end of the bargain.
Well, the kind of stuff CCP is implementing right now is not necessarily the kind of stuff that people living in those spaces actually want for selfish reasons, which might be a more indication of health for you, because it's not. Yeah, I agree that CCP, and that's kind of like, that goes beyond EVE issues. It goes a bit into designing for EVE players versus designing a good game, right? So sometimes what we want and what we ask for isn't the best for the health of the game, particularly if we are coming from only a single background and not. But sometimes when you push that something is a problem for years and years, and people realize it's really a problem, and it's been a long run, 4-year, 5-year run for me to argue those kind of things. And now there is like a bit more consensus, but still what CCP does isn't making everyone happy. It's not like everyone wanted the scarcity period and so on. So maybe that's an indicator for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally think they're going in the right direction. I do, and I'm very hopeful at some of the stuff that's happened. It's more like when I look at the CSM, right? Player representatives, and most of them come from a certain same play style. And I would even group you in with people who are in nullsec, right? Because you survive off them, but that's still part of your reference base. It's to kill things, to get out there into PvP and stuff. Sure. And it's a very small sliver of representation. And I don't consider Steve part of this group. I don't think many are. There are facets of of some of the CSM that are, but a very small sliver of people that talk about the texture. The difference is in play styles, and there are people who want to build stuff and collect and do that sort of thing. And there seems to be like, we can do PvP, we can make PvE like PvP, so they would be better and more able to transition to PvP. And to give some imagination, we'll put this lore layer on top of it. And I was explaining this to someone. That feels to me like a vanilla soft serve ice cream, and you're just dipping it in chocolate. And that's not what I'm talking about as far as something that would be delicious to eat. I'm talking fruits in there and nuts in there and some more texture, some more things for players that aren't just about, the adrenaline rush and, fighting somebody and dominating somebody or torturing them in whatever way, like griefing them, like people who don't have any really aspiration to get involved in that sort of thing, but to explore.
Yeah. I agree that there is a I think everyone agrees that there is a overrepresentation of certain backgrounds, and um, certain backgrounds are not significantly represented. But I would say the fighters are underrepresented, and for example, the kind of psychology you describe, I think Dunk Dinkle makes a very, very, very good job of representing it. So
That's why I said
it's
some
not
players have
it's,
it, but
yeah. It's not like you can, yeah, you can be a null empire person, like empire member at least, and still represent those kind of psychologies. Of course, it would have been better if the block voting and the very default mode of organization that null-sec empires had didn't have a great effect on elections, but that's how elections work. I think there are things CCP can do to improve it. I have very radical ideas about improving CSM elections, but I agree with you that, I mean, it's accidental that Don Dinkle got elected this year, and next year it's not guaranteed that someone will represent that kind of psychology.
no, but I mean, and I'm not I'm not going to overpraise Dunk. He's a friend of mine in real life. I like him a lot. In game terms, as his representation goes of things, I also feel like he's said some very contrived things that everybody believes, right? Because and I put that in quotations. Everybody believes. I think Brisk is good at doing that too. He kind of says what everybody thinks, except that it only represents a certain group of people that talk. There's a lot of silent players out there that don't think that way. Sorry, I'm shouting.
I mean, for any CSM, that's true, right? I mean, even
for any CSM, that's why you get a variety of CSM. You don't get the same.
True.
You don't get different colors of the same thing. You get different shapes, different sizes. But that's not our problem. Like that's CCP's problem for a bad election system that rewards masses. And by masses, I mean like focused masses.
I mean, until very recently, I didn't think there was a better election system that's possible, that's not going to be gained, and so on and so forth. But I think I made some breakthroughs, and now I'm convinced that there are better. But hopefully, I can tell you, CCP is not blind to this issue.
Oh, I know.
And CCP is not blind to overrepresentation, and they have their filters, and also they have means to go contact other kinds of players that they want feedback from. So
that's what gives me hope, actually, that CSM is only part of a puzzle. And I'll say that same thing to our Narni from New Zealand. It looks like NZ, that if you don't have any faith in CSM, that's okay. Understand that CCP gets a lot of value out of CSM in certain ways, but also listens to other ways of interacting with players, whether it be surveys or other ways of outreach.
A small anecdote I want to make about this issue is in the first summit, I was so baffled how many CCPers, how many important people in CCP, like game changers, game makers, producers, how many of them actually follow the Reddit posts I made about some issue or another, and how to fix it, and particularly the more elaborate ones. And if it's elaborate and well argued, it's not going to be bashed. It's not going to be. It's some posts thrive on Reddit because they're well argued, and they're even if it's the opposite opinion, people won't download it because you spent some time on it. And it can be on forums as well. You can do the same on forums as well. So if you believe in an issue, the very basic thing you can do is be vocal about it in a way that's elaborate, and in a way that you have to show that you also care about other play styles, and you are not coming from your own mindset only, but you consider everyone else. But then, even after that consideration, if something is still a problem, then go use Eve Media to be vocal about it. And then I'm pretty I can guarantee someone important at CCP will read it. Several important people will read it. People follow that kind of stuff. They're not vocal. They're not going to talk in Reddit, and because corporate reasons, but they are reading. They're watching.
So they're listening. They're listening to everybody as well as they can. And when they see a well-made argument, they're going to absorb that. When they see,
can I make a point actually about
go ahead,
this new
Lilo.
change?
Sure.
Hi, thank you. So a while ago, I was in Snuff, and we had this sort of interesting interaction between our US and our EU time zones. So one time zone would typically hit a structure, and then the other time zone, so like the EU time zone, right? And then the US time zone would come around later and then try and blow up the structure. And we went around doing this for the better part of 6 months or so, trying to get fights like this. And a lot of the times, this created a huge amount of burnout between both of the time zones because it's really like it's not a fun experience shooting citadels in general. And it was actually kind of one of the reasons I think a lot of people got burnt out from it. So you'd kill the structures, and generally speaking, we wouldn't get fights. I mean, we'd be lucky if we could get a fight on like 1/10 of the structures, right? But so you wouldn't get fights off them, and you would kill this structure, and you would get no loot. I mean, you'd get some shitty salvage and some modules or whatever dropped, which you had to take a freighter to loot, right? So it was a terrible experience in general. You'd get no loot. You wouldn't get a fight. It just sucked, right? And it totally burned out everybody. But with this new change, it's kind of interesting because you're still going to be there for shooting this thing for, if my math is correct, 56 minutes. I'm not sure if that's correct, but it should be about an hour.
Give or take.
Yeah, so you're going to be shooting it for an hour. So if you're in the same time zone as someone and you're saying, hey, I'm shooting your R64 and it's going to fucking die, people might actually be like, hey, that's not cool. We need to like flash form. We still have an hour to go. We'll fucking fight this. We'll defend it. And if they don't, then at least you have a chance of getting loot. So, I don't know. I think for nullsec, this doesn't really make much of a difference because you're not going to go into horde space and blow up an Athenor or something, right? But in lowsec, it might actually produce content in a way that we haven't seen in a while. So this actually is kind of a really exciting change, I think, for lowsec. I don't know what it means for highsec, frankly.
To clarify, were you cleaning low power structures?
Yes, as well as structures that had service modules as well online.
Yeah, well, because in lowsec, even in lowsec, the active structures won't drop anything, right? So nothing changes for. Just to clarify, nothing changes for fuel structures. Only on-fuel structures will be in this mode that you can get a jackpot.
Well, I will say though, there is like just the chance of getting loot, even if you're shooting in a citadel. I mean, it's very satisfying. Like when we were invited a few times into wormholes, where we killed the Hard Knocks Keepstar, and there was another Fortizar from some other random group. And just the loot sphere, is extremely satisfying psychologically.
I completely agree.
Micah, could you confirm a specific mechanic, because I didn't get a clarification on this yesterday? So the language in the dev blog says a structure that has not had fuel drawn by its service modules in 7 days, which means that it could be a fueled structure that who has no service modules or has only offline service modules.
Yeah, I'm not fully clear on myself on that, so I would have to ask. I cannot confirm anything right now. But yeah, I was so since pauses left the game, or like they are still in the game, but people are not using it widespread, right? And there are other things that used that acted as jackpot loot, jackpot mechanics that were also kind of nerfed, or like, for example, one of them was you would, maybe you don't know this, but the drone region blueprints used to drop augmented drones blueprints, and then some of those blueprints were valued 6 billion and so on. But then excavators came, kind of changed the prices, so that was removed. I can count maybe 3-4 stuff like that, but the most prominent was the pulses, right? They used to drop, like, some of the pulses, they used to drop 1 billion, 100 billion, 50 billion, and it's like pinata effect, right? And then that was kind of gone once the pulses were not there anymore. And then it's a very, like, it's the healthy gambling it's the hypernet might be like inorganic, but this is the organic kind of gambling effect where you can get the jackpot. So why not attack that structure, right? Why not spend your time, your evening killing that thing? So that's very strong sensation, and no harm comes out of it when it's an I think I was very vocal about these kind of jackpot effects and the need to retain them in the game. And I'm very happy that this the abundant stuff might yield some of those psychology back.
Let's see. I saw a few comments because Snuff doesn't get a lot of sympathy for wrecking LowSec since you guys seem to dominate it. Do you have anything that you want to respond to people who say like you shouldn't complain about having destroyed content since you kind of overdid it, you overfished people that were in LowSec? Lelob, you still here?
No, because I don't buy that argument at all. Having been in PL back before fatigue happened, when we would move into Amamaki, we would fish the region out, and people don't comprehend what a fished out region actually looks like nowadays. So when they say that Snuff is killing LowSec, I call bullshit on that.
What's a fished out region actually look like?
Like you would not okay. So if I wanted back before fatigue and before Phoebe, I could take a Drake with a PL ticker and I could autopilot it through LowSec wherever the fuck I wanted to.
Your title alone would scare people away from attacking you.
Yeah, they would. Like I could autopilot it, like literally autopilot it, and I would arrive safely in my destination in my Drake or my Hick or whatever the fuck it was, because people would not dare touch it. And you would see it because we'd have to hunt out further and further and further after each week and week and week. And that's not what happens when Snuff is in a region. You still see tons of people in Tama and Black Rise or whatever. So that's just a facetious argument from, I don't know, a bunch of whiners, frankly. I don't buy that one bit.
All right, thanks. Okay, last thing. I don't know if we covered this already, but supers that sit on citadels. I'm not talking about Titans, but I'm talking about like a Nyx, right? Somebody wants to leave one of the bigger groups, says, I'm going to jump out, and they get to a certain Fortizar citadel, and they park their super there. If that citadel runs out of gas and blows up, when this guy comes back to the game, what happens?
I think he's
their ship that was intended to be an alliance level asset may be gone.
I mean, if he's sitting in a ship, then he's going to be in space, right?
Yeah, so he's going to end up logging in and floating to a place where there is no security for that character, and likely get caught and possibly destroyed or whatever. But the point is, there is risk for people who left the game and had assets that were away from these more protected, more fuel efficient groups.
By the way, mechanically, there's room to survive there. Just to bring your super out. If you realize the citadel is dead and you're on the login screen, you look like you're in space, then you can jump out immediately after landing, because in LowSec there's no bubble, right? So before people can target and tackle you, you can jump out. So get your signer ready on a safer place and jump out. I mean,
you should be okay.
A lot of the cases when something changes and people think there's nothing to respond or no mechanical room to, remain safe. But many of the cases, and there is mechanical room. For example, most of our super kills in Delve, there is mechanical room for the individual to survive actually, but they don't realize, and I don't want to give it away. So
yeah, all right, don't give away your secrets.
I just want to repeat what I said about that ship, that was designed to be an alliance level asset.
I like that touch.
Yeah, people have this, their own personal super carrier. This is a thing. Like the cat is out of the bag and it's out there. But the design of this ship, like many years ago when it was designed, was that it would be an alliance level asset. So the fact that someone may go away from the game for a while, this game which you are intended to engage in order to access the higher level gameplay, and come back and find that ship gone is like, yeah, you may find that ship gone.
Maybe it's supposed to be gone.
Well, yeah, but that would only happen in a Keepstar, right? Like
No.
Keepstars are the only thing that a Super Titan can park in.
No, I'm sorry.
So-
People park on top of an Astra House, for instance, and then they log off.
Oh, well then they appear.
Yeah,
when
you
they
appear
log
in space, but you don't get tethered, right? So that, I guess that's the problem. But
Oh yeah, but like unless somebody's like actively camping that spot.
Right. And I'm not just talking about a player that, that logs off, logs their character off sitting in the ship while tethered in space. I'm talking about a player that has this asset and they're not sitting in it and it's parked in a Keepstar and it goes away. But I mean, like, go figure. I don't think any Keepstars are going unfueled.
Yeah, this would have to be an abandoned Keepstar for that to work.
Which like doesn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's
Yeah.
just not. I'm pretty sure it's a non-issue.
That's a non-issue. Yeah, Keepstars will always be fueled. I don't know anyone who would just leave something there, unless the person that had the keys disappeared for some reason.
Let's see when they abandon the TTT.
We were discussing that earlier. If that explodes, it's going to be a giant free-for-all for everybody, not just Test. Or
I mean, that would excite a lot. Like, that would excite me. Of course, a lot of people would lose a lot of stuff, but it's something that's historical.
Yeah, but the credibility hit that Vili would take would just destroy his.
Sure.
He would never let that happen. But if somebody else did, and there's only 2 people who have the keys to that place, so yeah. But I don't know. It would be interesting, right? We were talking about that honeypot where you build maybe a market hub. And then after a while, you decide you want to cash it in. Then you.
I think that kind of stuff will happen, and maybe in certain market hubs in HiSec, also sometimes in NASEC, I think people will recruit corps and then just abandon the structure and kick the corp out, and
What about Plex? Plex doesn't fall out, does it? It's not considered loot, is it?
Plex in the Plex vault doesn't, but if you have Plex in a hangar, it does. Now, I don't know why you might have Plex in a hangar, but if it is, it'll drop.
No, on the market. I'm selling it through like a cheap Astra House that gives me low tax rate, so I want to sell my Plex through there. I put up an order, and then I come back, and it's gone.
No, the items that are... Okay, so the items that are up for sale do not exist.
Oh, I see.
They're just
They're just orders.
Yeah, that doesn't drop. It's the content, the ship hanger and the item hanger drops when the structure is destroyed.
What happens to those items if they were up for sale in a Citadel?
Well, if you had it stored, I mean, it depends. If you're selling it straight out of your vault, it's safe. The order itself is a piece of paper, so that goes up in flames. You don't lose anything.
You cannot sell. You have to move them to item hanger to be able to put them.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
But wait a second though. Like it, in order for that to happen, the market service thingamajig would have to go offline, wouldn't it?
Well, if we're talking about a situation where the structure is abandoned, then those orders would be gone.
Yeah. So then, wouldn't the orders, the item on the market order, because the market service module went offline, then the market orders would go into your item hanger, and then they would be lootable.
They should get kicked into the item hanger after that service module goes offline.
Yeah, but you'd have to wait for a week after the market service module goes offline.
So we're trying to get to is if you're selling Plex in a structure and the owner lets it go into abandoned state and then destroys it, will he be able to pick up your Plex?
Yes, it looks like he will be able to get it.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's lootable.
So
the only question is, if a Plex order is canceled, does that Plex get delivered to the item hanger, or does that get sucked up into the vault automatically? Because they've added that mechanic of pretty much any time you loot Plex, if you accept it from a contract or it's traded, it gets sucked up into the vault automatically.
Now, for the people in chat, we're working this out, or we're trying to figure out like what these secondary, tertiary situations are. This seems to me like it would be a very common situation in HiSec for people to want to sell through, 0.5% tax Plex Plex shelters or whatever, and
It's 1% now since the market changes.
okay, minimum 1%. Yeah, so I can see this happening. This seems like it would be something that would happen, and if you could trap people's Plex into your Citadel, and then by some chance they're not watching for 7 days, and you destroy it, and you have an opportunity to grab it.
So Plex is the only questionable item because we're not sure if it gets sucked up into the Plex vault or not, but everything else is not questionable. So all those injectors and extractors and training certificates, all of those things that are up for sale, those will definitely be in the hangar, no question.
Yeah.
But say you're a seller of those, it's a very high volatile market, right? You're potentially checking it every day, and you're gonna see your orders gone, and that's gonna take 1 week, and you can always stash it somewhere else.
But I think you're
We
cool
need
if
to
you're
test this
selling
now.
if you're selling remotely from a different location, then it doesn't matter. Or does it? That's the thing
Well, I
we
mean,
love about it.
the market order will be gone until the Citadel dies and it distributes the loot. You have 7 days in between. That your market order will disappear, and you're gonna wonder what's happened there.
But the
Because
market doesn't alert you
module-
that it shut down. You have to be
Yeah, but I was saying like these are
You can
like
open
very
up your
volatile
orders.
markets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
notifications.
you have to open it manually, right?
You have to open up the market orders box to show your active orders, and you should see the one that you had up is gone.
You have to notice it's missing, though. It doesn't tell you it left.
Yeah, it would be handy to have a notification, but I'm not sure that that's warranted for a market order. You really should be keeping track of your orders.
There are people who sell a lot of things, right? And there's little bits of a lot of things can get confusing.
The more you sell, the more you should keep track of it.
Well, I mean, the game should keep track of it for you. If something disappears and doesn't tell you it disappeared, that seems like a problem to me.
So if there might be some sort of refund, I'm not sure. Not for a sell order, only for a buy order. Yeah.
Well,
I'm testing this now, so we'll know in 5 minutes if it gets sent to the Plex thingy or the item hanger.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's some interesting stuff. I think there will be complaints for sure. On a whole, it seems like a great change to clean up. Look, as far as I'm concerned, this is a good thing for people who have good reputations and good follow through. It's a bad thing for people who flake and leave the game and who don't have good communication. So people with good communication are going to benefit from these changes.
Yeah, well, from the beginning, the CCP devs have talked about structures as opposed to stations as something that provides benefits. They're better in many ways, but there is risk involved. And to double down on that is not any different than their original design spec for this particular piece of content for the Upwell structures. Like, this was the design. They're just doubling down on it.
Yeah. My fear is there's a lot of people that are a lot newer to this game that are getting their feet on the ground. I'm not just talking about my friend Chubby here. There's another guy I talked to who they don't understand all the stuff that we understand. They don't understand a fraction of it. And that's no fault of their own. They just have been playing this less time. And a lot of them are going to fall into situations where things are just going to disappear on them. And they're not going to know why. And it's
again, I would contest the wording a lot. It's just low power abundant structures. I mean, imagine a new player stashing their stuff somewhere, and that Citadel goes offline and dies and spits out loot.
Or imagine
numerically, I don't imagine too many cases.
No, but those are going to be your young players that you want to protect more than the older players. And here's the problem I see. There's a lot of like tax scandals that CEOs and high sec who attract anybody. They'll just keep blasting spam for people to join their corporation. People join their corporation and they end up taxing them. They don't even know they're being taxed, but they're earning money for themselves, but also earning money for this guy who is just blasting this out to a bunch of strangers. And can you imagine now the situation where he's like, move all your stuff into this sort of place? I mean, there's a lot of nefarious things that can happen that are going to prey on people who are just getting into this game. A CEO,
I can see how that can be. Maybe CCP can do something about HiSec.
In short, a CEO in HiSec can create a place, attract strangers, have them move their stuff in, and then essentially blow it up with his friends and come and pillage all the stuff that fell out of it. It probably won't be worth much since these are new players, but that dynamic is just right there for somebody. And they might do it just for bragging rights. That's the kind of place that Eve is.
Yeah. If it's to me,
scams are nothing new. That's just another scam.
But it really will. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, to me, it's just a problem of whether it's worth it or not. If it's not worth it, say because you're killing at least right tower or something like cheaper Citadel, right? If you get 50 new players in a Citadel, stash their stuff, is it going to be profitable? Is it going to be worth your time? If it's not, then I don't think that's a real big issue because bragging rights are something, but I don't know. I don't think anybody likes to brag about like new player kill mails or whatever.
We'll see. There are going to be a few of these incidents. People get outraged, and it's just like it's the same cycle we've seen.
People do the tax thing because it's profitable, and it's like it's worth your time, right? Maybe this thing might not be. I'm not sure.
I don't know. The game Eve, games like Eve have a history of letting people mess with other people, and that lasts for a little while. And it's actually a lot more rare than you think. But we'll see. I don't know. So,
go
ahead.
It was 5 minutes.
Sure.
It goes right back into the Plex vault. So Plex will not be lootable.
Okay, good to know.
At least I'm 90%
Injectors
sure, because I obviously didn't offline a service module to check this. But when you cancel the order, it goes into your Plex vault, not your item hanger.
If you sell it from there, yeah. Okay, good. So it just burns up the order. It doesn't burn up the property. That's probably a good thing.
All of the other stable items, so extractors, injectors, small and large, training certificates, hypercores, any of those stable items, those are all going to be in full drop.
Wow, like setting up a market hub, a player-made market hub is going to be a little more tricky for.
Yeah, it's going to require a bit more trust, I guess.
Yeah, you're going to need good name recognition.
Which might mean like
more specialization.
Yeah.
It might mean the big player wins better, right? So everyone begins trusting TTT more because it's not going.
Yeah, you look at the leverage, right? Like if I were to go into the business of having trade hubs, let's say, and let's say they could be protected. I'm not saying they can, but let's say they could. Then people would know that I had something more valuable, my reputation, than screwing them over for their measly billions of ISK. And so I'm at an advantage over a new guy that nobody knows to open up a trade hub and have people trust me enough.
I mean, this is kind of a facetious argument though, because you're in, like, chances are if you're in a trade hub, with the exception, I mean, most trade hubs are always going to be forts, at least in HiSec from what I've noticed. So, you have to be making at least 10 bill of loot of other people's stuff. And, loot drops not 50/50, so you need 20, 30.
The Plex markets are never Fortizars. So people sell Plex.
Right. I meant those as the exception as well. But like in actual, like a proper market, like there's one in Stackmon, for example, which is a real fort, which is high sec right next to low sec. And that's a proper market. But you'd have to have 20 or 30 bill of other people's shit in there before you'd even consider abandoning it. in order to make it profitable, because you're still losing a fork, right? Like it's not free. So,
by the way, one very important detail here is it's going to be the high sec abandonment. You shouldn't assume that you're going to get all the loot here for yourself, because it's going to be like a loot blob. Everyone can take it. If you shoot anyone else, you're going to get concorded. So people will notice you're killing a citadel. You just abandoned a citadel. You're killing it, and they're going for the loot. And if you ever kill the wormhole structure, actually carrying that loot to somewhere safe takes 3-4 hours, and depending on how much loot there is. So even if you abandon your own structure, and it's gonna be interesting. I don't think I don't think people will assume that all the loot will be theirs. Basically,
Yeah.
you cannot safely assume that.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you get a suspect timer when you steal
Yellow
from a
cans.
hangar? Pardon me?
Yellow cans in high sec.
Yeah, but like the loot hangar is a different type of. It's not a cargo container.
I asked this to CCP. I asked it today. There's no response yet. I'm assuming there's not going to be a suspect, because those won't belong to anyone, right?
Yeah, because if you go in there or something and you get an immediate suspect timer in a freighter in high sec, you've got a real problem there.
Yeah.
Maybe your can will belong to you. Who knows?
Would it not make sense that the cans that drop from the structure that you killed are yours and not belonging to anyone else?
You could come pick it
Or
up.
maybe it belongs to their owner.
Yeah.
Because every can is assigned to a character.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's an interesting thing to explore. Somebody else says here.
Eve Dobra in chat says the can belongs to the attacker of the structure.
Really? Who says that? Does CCP confirm that? I didn't see the confirmation.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm reporting what chat said, so we can ask him if he was on grid when that happened and tested it out, or where does his data come from.
This has never. No Citadel has ever dropped loot in high sec yet, so we will know. In wormholes.
In wormholes, and you can. It's not a matter of suspect. You can see the owner. If you just click on a can, it shows the picture of the owner of it.
Yeah, but these are not. We don't actually know.
Right. So let's ask him, because he seems to know. So maybe he knows. Eve Dobra in chat. Can you tell us?
Who are you talking about? Eve Dobra?
I don't think there's any way he can know, because
if he's talking, it's wormholes. Yeah, if he's talking, it's wormholes.
It's so the drop mechanic will be the same as wormholes, and if the cans show the owner in wormholes, then the cans will show the owners in K-Space.
Yeah, but these are the special cans, so they are different items.
It's the same
right?
can. No, the wormhole cans from a structure may show the owner. Let's find out.
Yeah, that's true, but you don't know if you're gonna go suspect if you loot it. That's the important thing.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting question. Again, there's a whole security apparatus that's different from wormholes and high sec. They may make some adjustments, Fonsway. I think CCP would have to answer the question. Any references we have now are just going to be a different situation.
I think it would be very exciting if everyone meant suspect, and except if it's your own can.
Right.
Then you don't go suspect.
You can come pick up your own can. But does that defeat the point of wanting to clear these out? Because the incentive is to get the loot.
Well, even if you don't go suspect, then it means, if you want to get the loot, you get the force there, right? And then if people go suspect, you can actually kill them, and then save the loot for yourself. But if no one goes suspect, then you have the suicide gang, which is a big issue, and then you cannot suicide hundreds of people. So they're gonna just go nuts on your own loot.
Yeah, that sounds.
So I would say suspect might favor the basher more than no suspect.
Yeah. Well, in Null, I think what's going to happen is we think that people are going to travel to other people's areas and destroy these abandoned structures. But I think what they're going to do is consume themselves first. They'll consume their renters and consume themselves.
I don't.
They look around locally.
In nullsec though, it's not going to matter because like unless you're goons and there's like a structure or something, or your horde or whatever, and you've got somebody else's structure in your space, I don't think it's really relevant because they're gonna, like, the standing fleets in all the blob areas will fight you regardless of whether or not you're shooting at an abandoned structure, right? Like they'll just fight you just because you're in their space. So you're not going to kill. I'd be very surprised if you killed many abandoned structures.
I can say the nullsec people, they're gonna kill their own abandoned structures and alliance level assets. That's for sure what's gonna happen, I think.
I think so too, but why do you think? Just easy?
I mean, I talked to nullsec people.
Oh.
I mean, that's a strategy, right? You don't leave loot pinata. If you notice one, you don't leave it to. And people used to kill bosses before, but it's very unnoticeable if you have an unfilled boss in your own space as an empire builder. Citadels are a bit more noticeable. You can see them from space anywhere, and you can walk to them. So if they're going to notice there's a low unfilled structure, they're going to probably warn the owner for a day or two, and then they're going to kill it and convert the loot to alliance of asset, or give it back to the owner.
Yeah. Well, it's 2 hours now. I want to thank you guys for coming around. Everybody in chat, thanks for putting in your opinions and facts. And Olmeca, thanks for stopping by. Lee Loeb. Let me see. Fonsway, of course, early on. Caleb, he took off. He's doing a show. We're going to go to him next. And Phantomite, thanks for chipping in. Appreciate you guys. Oh, and Chubby Man, thanks very much for telling us your story. I'm very interested in people like you and how you're getting through. I'm going to keep my eye on that. So stay tuned, guys. We're going to move over to... we're going to actually raid INN, and the show that's on right now is Push to Talk. Caleb's on that, so we're going to raid him. I want to tell you, we have some interesting changes coming to Talking in Stations. You can always join our Discord and hang out with us while we talk all day long, most days. And you're welcome to participate in there anytime you want. What we're going to do with Talking in Stations, I'll probably announce it on Sunday, tomorrow, is we're going to change up some of the show formats and just the frequency of shows and stuff like that. It's all being worked out. And so I'll talk to you about that soon, tomorrow. But look for more content from Talking in Stations, which I think would be pretty cool. Thanks again, everyone. Stay tuned as we are going to raid a show in progress.
Thanks, Metro.
Push to Talk. Thank you, Olmeca, for stopping by. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. And Phantomite for CSM, by the way.
Are you running for... Oh, Phantomite. He's
Phantomite.
Snuff, yeah. All right, cool. All right, guys, thanks a lot. All right, let's jump over to Push to Talk, already in progress. Thanks.